Attention, attention, your attention is required now.
This is a universal notice and warning. This notice and warning applies to all observational facets, within, without, above, and below. This notice and warning is manifest through an observational facet with the lawful authority to do so. Special warning. This notice and warning exposes the obstacle by which insanity was produced in consciousness. The continued reception of this notice and warning will trigger a process by which an observational facet returns to a state of sanity that, once begun, will proceed to its unavoidable conclusion. Those observational facets that are to continue in confusion will stop the reception of this notice and warning immediately. Continuance of this notice and warning binds the observational facet receiving this notice and warning to contract in natural law. Continuance constitutes willing acceptance of this contract. Once this contract is accepted, there exists no exemption or nullification of the contract that is provided for by that which empowers natural law. The competency qualification of the observational facet to enter and be bound to this contract is met because a return to sanity from a state of confusion is itself an act of sanity, thus demonstrates substantively the competence of the observational facet, as only the insane would willingly choose to remain in confusion. If there is fear or doubt, then do not proceed. 37 seconds are provided to end this notice and warning, or the observational facet receiving this notice and warning is bound to the contract under natural law. Effective immediately, the insanity and subsequent confusion that places the people of Earth in a state of lawful incompetence is at an end and is being remedied right now. The insanity and confusion of the people of Earth was necessary to affirm to a high degree of certainty causes and effects as they conform to natural law. The suffering that this state of insanity manifested is used to affirm, confirm, and demonstrate substantively in consciousness acts that provoke discomfort, pain, unhappiness, and the death of observational facets. As it is necessary that consciousness possess experience by which to judge action according to natural law, a quarantined realm was required to achieve this purposeful and constructive objective. A selective obstacle in consciousness is required to manifest the state of insanity. That obstacle is no longer required as natural law has been affirmed to a sufficient degree of certainty. This notice and warning will expose the obstacle in consciousness within the quarantined realm such that observational facets within, without, above, and below can avoid it and return to a state of sanity and competence under natural law. The obstacle required a withholding from those observational facets entering within the quarantined realm constructive knowledge of what insanity means. This produces an inability in the conscious facet of avoiding acts done in confusion. The confusion produces suffering required to affirm the law. The obstacle has achieved its objective. Exposure of the obstacle. The generally accepted view of what insanity means is that it is when one commits the same act over and over expecting different results, consequences, or effects, or that sanity is determined and defined by a majority of observational facets against an arbitrary qualification based on no objective standard. Neither definition contains sufficient constructive meaning to expose the actual meaning of insanity. In the first case, the statement does not expose what is being done over and over. Observational facets often presume it is any act they engage in. If one cannot know the effect of an act before the act, then precedent has not yet been established, and suffering is required by at least one observational facet to establish the consequence or effect of engaging in a particular act. In this way, trial by combat has been useful to produce a verdict, but again, not without the required suffering. That which one actually does over and over is a continued existence in the quarantined realm without a constructive and useful awareness of what insanity itself means. This is the required obstacle that produces suffering and affirms natural law, as one cannot know the natural law before it is affirmed and precedent is set. Suffering is produced both in setting precedent and in ignorance of established precedent, which results from the extreme state of confusion that exists in consciousness. A more complete meaning of insanity can be divined from the following, provided the terms contained therein are also constructively known. Insanity is the inability to perceive the truth. Perception does not exclusively depend on senses or logic and has its root in exposure through intuition. Truth constitutes all that is in what observational facets know as right now, and exclusively in this and only this singular moment, regardless of an observational facet's willingness to face and accept all that is. The past is a thought-form memory existing only in the mind that consists of a now which is not, and is merely a thought construct entirely dependent on unreliable evidence of memory itself, and artifacts that constitute incomplete evidence that lacks power to remanifest what is, that now is not. The future is a hypothetical thought form of what might be, which is not, and observational facets have only an insufficient degree of certainty that the future will be now, as presumed. The concept of the future, presented in this way, purposefully blinds the observational facet from the impending suffering and their subsequent escape in the affirmation of natural law. If the affirmation of natural law lacks a sufficient degree of certainty, acts are repeated with the prescribed suffering to achieve a sufficient degree of certainty. When an observational facet confines their attention to right now and accept all that is as truth, then they avoid the converse of truth, fiction. Fiction is not truth. Fiction exists entirely in the mind and has no substantive being, mind, will, or power outside of the mind. Any expression of power expressed in truth requires a substantive agent. It is not the fiction, but rather the confused acts of the agent that exists in truth. Those that deceive themselves in thinking otherwise are insane. Those observational facets that claim that they act on the authority of a fiction or represent a fiction lack the substantive ability to expose the mind and will of the fiction and simply deceive themselves. Any substantive act on the behalf of a fiction and the claim that one possesses the authority to do so is in error and constitutes an act that produces suffering in natural law in all those who deceive themselves. Fictions can be documented whereby the document is true, but the words can only point to the fiction in the mind.